This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 147 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amalith.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. Today we're going to do some hot questions. These are random questions that we've all put in a doc. The first question, do you think better on your own or with other people?
With other people for sure.
I think it depends, right?
For me, it depends on the problem. If it's a sort of deep thinking problem, definitely better on my own. If it is something where we have to come to, I don't want to say consensus, but one where we need a bunch of different new angles at something, then having a bunch of people throw out ideas and go back and forth with narrowing it down, that's better with people. But usually if it's just a lot of development tasks, then for me it's alone.
Surely it's better to think on your own, then think with other people, then think on your own, then think with other people, and kind of go back and forth on that cycle.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
After I came out of that deep, thinky place, I would want to bounce those ideas off a coworker or something to see if I went in a horrible direction or something.
It's interesting you say, Kevin, for the hard stuff, you would want to think on your own. If I get stuck or I'm worried I'm going to get stuck, I really want to talk it through with someone. And then if I've got easy stuff to do, or if I've done that talking through and I've figured it out and I want to churn out some stuff, then I want to be on my own. So I think, I think I'm a bit unusual in that. I think a lot of people, especially programmers, are the other way around.
Well, I definitely agree. If I get stuck or if I feel like I'm getting stuck, going to somebody and either talking through what I've already thought or getting ideas bounced off somebody, that is very helpful. But I don't find it helpful in sometimes the working through a problem. If that, I just find a little bit more distracting. And I've also found for some classes of problems, in fact, we actually had this recently at work, there was a deep problem that took a good bit of research. After that was done, we got into a room with a bunch of people to talk through some of that research. The issue, though, was many of the people in the room had not done any of the research or any of the thinking on the matter. So there was a lot of the, why can't you just, or can't we just, which in the initial stages is very helpful. But when you've already gone through a lot of it, sometimes it's also really difficult to re-articulate the deep edge cases that prevent something from happening in a group setting like that. And it can be a little bit more draining because you're I've already spent all this time going through this and figuring out these edge cases. We don't want to just relitigate this as a group. But it can be helpful. It depends on the situation, I guess.
I definitely see that. But I'm thinking about that scenario and thinking, when I've been in that scenario, it's very painful. But I think it's particularly painful if I've done the initial thinking on my own. If I've got a group of people who I've done it with, and then there's another group of people who are well, what about this? What about this? It's much easier for me to sort of retain the confidence that actually our initial thinking was sensible and this is just a lack of context that's causing these questions. If I'm on my own, I'm just drained by that, I think.
I think it requires a high degree of trust between the people, and that's why it can vary from group to group and even problem to problem.
It can also be just exhausting, right? If you spend all day working on a problem together, the level of focus is so high, which is cool. You are utterly drained at the end of it.
All right. Do you have any non-standard debugging habits or tips?
Printf can be just as useful as a debugger, but I don't know that's exactly non-standard.
The non-standard-ish one that I have used here is I've used a Stream Deck with the buttons coded for whatever debugger. So step into, step out, step over, all these different things where I don't always use something like GDB or LLDB, but when I do, they're extremely useful. And so sometimes I'll have to relook up well, what was the command for this, or how did I do this particular part? And I started encoding that into a Stream Deck, and that has been super useful. Before, I still like to have the how did I get this written down in notes, but having a little console keypad where I can just hit all the different buttons to progress through a debugging session has been immensely helpful.
That sounds really cool.
Is that not kind of taking on technical debt, though? When the Stream Deck breaks, you either have to buy another one or go back to doing it the long way.
So there's always the long way, but the long way is those are all just commands. And if I have them, at least the way they're displayed on mine, they'll just say step into, step over, step I. things like that. And that also kind of shows the command as well. And there's some things that you just can't do in the Stream Deck. Like there's some things where you want to print out a particular address in memory or something, or watch something, but it still is useful for like the really quick, like getting through some different sessions. So there are not always times where I have the Stream Deck available, but it is helpful when I have it.
You can just make shortcuts for all of those things if you don't have the Stream Deck. And if you have a keyboard with layers, you could make a debugging layer.
I've thought about doing that before because I love keyboards and I love layers, except there is something useful in being able to see the buttons. And the useful thing about the Stream Deck is you can have what amounts to kind of layers.
Icons.
Right. And you have these icons that where you can have a whole bunch of different pages of them and you can kind of page through the one that you want.
Yeah, each button's a little screen, right? So you can literally put anything you want on it.
Exactly. They're all just little images. So most of mine just have like either the command or the command down low with, some little icon above it. But either way, like that's just a little hint and I can like just kind of rapidly go through it that way. But it also shows me what the command is.
I keep thinking about getting something like a Stream Deck or making my own, but then I bind a key to it instead. And then I have to memorize it. And if it was on a Stream Deck, it would just have an icon. That is definitely a very nice feature. I totally get that.
The other nice thing about the Stream Deck too, not to just like shill for them or anything, is the very top level of my screen has a bunch of different buttons for the various like debugging sessions, because those might have different key commands. So it's like it looks like a desktop. You can select which application you're in, and that gives you the commands for that application. Now you have to plug all this in manually. This is not something that they come with natively, but I found it helpful when I have it. I can still debug just fine without it, but when I have it there on my desk, it does make things easier.
Can you save the profile then so that you could save time if it breaks and you have to buy a new one?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You can export it as, I think it's JSON or something.
Oh, right. Nice.
That's very cool. But back to debugging, I definitely think the first thing I came to was if you get really good at debugging by printing out stuff, it works for you on so many different platforms. Like almost every situation you're in, you're going to be able to see some kind of output. But there's loads of situations where you can't run the debugger, or the debugger you would have to use would be different from the debugger you're used to. So getting good at printing out and using printing out to figure out what's going on is a really reusable skill. But I do feel a little bit guilty that I'm not better on the debugger, because sometimes I think I'm spending a lot of time waiting for the program to start up just so that I can get a log message out of it. And if I was just able to, cruise around in the debugger, I'd already know the answer.
One that I wish I've done more of is using things like RR, where you can record a debugging session and then you can play it forwards or backwards.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's really cool because you run the command, you get to the crash or whatever it is, you save off that output, then you open this up in something like RR, where you can you have the standard kind of debugging commands, but you can also go forward and backwards through the actual, it's almost like a recording. And that's a really cool tool that I wish I'd used more, but just haven't taken the time to really fully learn it.
That was actually my first debugging experience with Go, was using one of those debuggers that can go forwards and backwards, and it was really nice.
I think there's also the obligatory mention needed here that obviously if you can reproduce your problem in a small unit test, then either debugging or just figuring out the problem is so much easier. So my hopefully completely standard debugging habit is have really good unit tests that mean that even if it's for really dumb things that you think will never go wrong, if you've got a test there, when you find a bug nearby, you've got the ability to set up a test that triggers the problem that's happening.
All right. What is your favorite interview question you've been asked or have asked yourself? Don't say fizz buzz.
I got asked a question once, and it has kind of stuck with me into some interviews that I have done later on as the interviewer. And the person asked me, it was something along the lines of, imagine you're at a terminal and you type in ping 8.8.8.8 and hit enter. Explain to me what happens. And that was it, right? And it was a software engineering question. And it turns out, as you kind of go through this problem, you can talk about the biomechanical physics of how the muscles work to hit enter, the electrical signals on the switches in the keyboard. You can talk about how a shell interprets a command, how the ping command gets loaded into memory. There's just all kinds of things that you can talk about, how the network traffic happens and ends up on the network interface and goes out the wire. There's just so many different levels that you can get to out of such a simple question that I really enjoyed that. And as I've used that in other interviews where you can even prompt the person and say, like, this is something where you can go as deep or as simple as you'd like, it really is interesting because you can take it in so many different directions, and some interviewees will take it in some very interesting directions where sometimes I'm like, wow, I had no idea that's how that works. That's really, really cool. So I've really enjoyed that question.
That's really cool. And it reminds me of a question we used to do, which is we'd give a scenario, not the same thing, but that similar kind of thing, and then say, what could go wrong? And then that allows you to unpack all the different layers in a similar way.
I suppose that kind of question really tells you a lot about the mind of the person you are asking it to.
Yeah, it also allows them to focus on an area that they feel comfortable in. So some people may skip entirely over how the shell works or programs get loaded into memory, and they might go directly down into the how the packets are routed and constructed and sent out on the wire and come back. Like they might focus on that. So it just allows you to see kind of where their specialty is and where they feel comfortable talking.
When I first heard that question, it must have been a few years ago, my first thought was DNS, which of course is like way down the line, but that tells you about how I think, I suppose.
It's always DNS.
It is always DNS.
The only problem I have with a question like that is that I'm worried that people who are just good at interviews are good at a question like that because it's very improvisy. So to go in almost the opposite direction, one question that I really liked doing at one place I worked was we just had a code base that was sort of, 3 files. It implemented a little web service. And we had a feature request and just said, can you add this feature to the service? So we'd spend a little bit of time explaining to them what it did. And then they'd be sitting at a proper IDE so that it'd be in a comfortable environment and you'd be working with them. They wouldn't just be expected to do it without talking to you, and just say, can you just add a feature? And here's the spec for that feature. And you can ask questions. And, I felt like it, to some extent, gave you an idea of what it would be like working with the person and how they think.
I would say that those sort of improvised questions are good if they are not the only style of questions you ask. Because I totally agree. I've worked with people before who were just really good at interviewing. And I've also worked with people that are terrible at interviewing, but amazing to work with. So interviewing itself, I'd say, is an art. For the questions where it's kind of do a little bit of realistic work, those ones I have mixed feelings on them because interviewing can be a stressful situation, especially if you need the job, you need the work. And depending on the code base, those can be difficult to learn at times. So I've done one before where it was like a chess game or something that they kind of have you work through adding in one of the pieces in their movements or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was a similar style, I think, to that, where add a feature to this thing. But it was a very constrained environment of this is chess, and here's the few files that make up what we've implemented thus far.
Amleth, have you ever been in an interview?
I interviewed to be, I don't even remember his title now, someone's assistant. And that was it. I've never had a technical interview, no.
Was it Elon?
No. But there was a question I heard from someone else that I loved, and I have tried to remember it so I can ask the next time I am in some kind of technical interview. And from the interviewee's perspective, it is, can I see some of your code? Any code that is meaningful, can I see some of it? And there might be issues with that around an NDA, or the code is proprietary, you're not actually part of the company, you haven't signed anything. I don't know, it depends on the situation. But I love that idea because maybe you don't want to work there after you see how bad some of their code is. Or maybe they don't show you the particularly bad code.
Yeah. Maybe you could ask, can I see your worst code? Can I just come in and talk about an interview question that I really hated? So this was part of a very painful and long interview process with a major search provider, which luckily for everyone ended up with me not going there.
You can say it's Ask Jeeves, that's fine.
So this was a phone interview, one of several phone interviews that happened. And I felt we weren't really getting on, but anyway, that's not the point. The point is, there was a question, I don't remember the exact details, but it was about effectively a kind of a mathematical function, like a function that just always did the same thing if you gave it the same input. And it was about repeatedly calling this on the same input again and again, I think. And it was one of those questions where the interviewer knows something clever, and what they want is for you to get to that thing that they know that makes them clever. And eventually we got there, which was that eventually this thing will repeat, right? Because if you keep going and going, you eventually you end up back where you started, because you're living in this kind of finite world of maths. And he just wanted me to get to that point. And eventually we got there, and he felt clever, and that was the end of that interview.
And you felt exhausted and annoyed and frustrated.
Yeah, basically trying to reverse engineer what he was trying to make me figure out.
I absolutely hate those styles of questions. And I've tried to take a tactic before where you go into let's say a coding style challenge, and you go into it blind as the interviewer, and the interviewee obviously is blind to the question as well. There's a much more even footing where you can even say this. You can say, I've never seen this problem before. And obviously they may not believe you, but you can say, I've never seen this problem before. And let's just work through it together. And when the candidates that have done well on this, like, they kind of open up, and it doesn't even really matter if they get the right answer or not. I mean, I guess it does at some stage of the interviews, but you can also see, like, how do they work? Do they know how to program or not? Like, that's what we really care about. Like, I don't really care if they found the fancy answer that is in 2 lines versus 20. If I can see, like, what their thought process is and whether or not they're comfortable editing, whether or not they're comfortable debugging what they're doing, like, that's the important part. And I've found that puts people a little bit more at ease, because they don't think that you also have, like, the gotcha game of like, I know the answer until you find it. Like, you're not getting past me.
Yeah, I do think one of the things that I'm really looking for from some questions in an interview is just to put someone at ease, because I really feel like you don't find out what someone's like if they're just stressed out. And it's so hard to put someone at ease in a situation like that. So we had a weird question, which at first glance I thought was just the worst kind of, like, obscure corners of knowledge question. The question was, I think it was a Java shop we were at. Basically, if I start with a variable that is the maximum integer, and then I do ++ on that, make it 1 bigger, what happens? And the first time I saw it, I was like, well, this is just an obscure corner of Java. Why are we testing for that? But it was the first question we used to ask. And the point is, most of the people who came in for that interview, even people who didn't do very well in the rest of it, were perfectly fine answering that question. And it actually put them at ease, because they felt like they knew, like, an obscure corner, but it wasn't that obscure, so most people knew it. So it kind of worked.
All right. If you code all night, is that the best code you write or the worst?
The best in the moment, but the worst the day after.
That's what I was about to say, is I think it's my best until later.
Is this like write drunk, edit sober type stuff? Like, maybe bang it out overnight, but then carefully review it the next day?
No, I definitely write my best code in the middle of the night. The only problem is that there's no one else around, so the whole thing about bouncing ideas off people can't happen. So it has to be something where I'm happy to make it up on my own, but if it is, definitely it's my best code. I can churn out, I can do like 4 hours without moving and really get in the zone.
But is that code where you've already thought through the problem and you're just doing the kind of donkey work of typing it out? Or is it actually solving problems?
It's solving problems, but probably not like the hardest of problems, just the in-between. But it's often, when I'm doing it, it's for one of my hobby projects, so I wouldn't even be discussing it with other people anyway. So even if it's a hard problem, I've got to somehow find a way through it.
I've hit plenty of the times where you feel like you're right on the cusp of solving something, you're making some change, and then you just hit that wall or whatever, right? You stop. And it's once you wake up the next morning or go for a walk or whatever, all of a sudden all of the answers hit you. And knowing when that's happening for me is hard. So that late night code is, I would say, not the best.
All right. Can we just assume everything is UTF-8 these days?
Should we or can we?
I think we can assume, in most contexts, for most of our code, I think we can assume Unicode. And depending on our programming language, that'll be UTF-8 or UTF-16. And we don't have to think about it much. But we probably do have to think about the edges of our code. Like, for example, if you're in the UTF-16 world and then stuff comes in over the network, it's probably going to be UTF-8. And if you're in a terminal, then who knows what the user's encoding in that terminal is. Although, hopefully these days on Linux, it's UTF-8. But on a lot of other platforms, it could be something you just don't know what it is.
We're definitely moving closer to UTF-8 being like the one thing that you have to care about or should care about. I don't think we're there yet. And I don't expect we will be there anytime immediately soon. But a lot of the newer languages coming out, like their strings are all, assume UTF-8 encoding. So like we're getting there. We're getting there slowly, but not there yet.
I agree that it is way better than it was, say, 10 years ago, or certainly 20 years ago. And when I say better, I mean it's UTF-8, because UTF-8 is the best thing ever.
In what other contexts do you have to think about other encodings? We've got the example so far of some languages defaulting to UTF-8 versus UTF-16, things over the web probably coming in as UTF-8. What are some others?
Well, yeah, the other one that I mentioned was like terminals, consoles, things like that. Often that, especially on Windows or something, there could be some kind of, I don't know what they are these days. Maybe these days it's fine, but certainly previously on Windows, it was whatever local encoding you had, and you would actually encounter that through command line arguments and things. They would come in some encoding that you had no way of even finding out what encoding it was, let alone using the right encoding. The other place I would think of is like data files. If you've got stuff saved, especially if it's some kind of legacy stuff, it could be in all kinds of formats.
Yeah, it's still really common too to have to do things like bomb sniffing, bomb being BOM, byte order mark, to try to determine the encoding of data files or things. So it's still common practice to have to do that kind of stuff.
All right. Should we just standardize on a single time zone? Yes, we should. UTC, thank you very much. End of conversation.
That's probably generally shared by most software developers, I would imagine at least, because time zones are the devil.
So yeah, my initial response to this was like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everyone should be on the same time zone, and when our lives should adapt around that. But then I started thinking, actually, there's like necessary complexity there, because it's about the times when people are awake and go to work and stuff like that. And so you're probably pushing the complexity somewhere else. Like everyone will know what time it is, but like, some other piece of complexity will happen to you when you're trying to organize a meeting with people on the other side of the world.
Well, like right now, the two Americans, their time has changed and ours hasn't changed yet. So someone had to be inconvenienced. Whereas if we were just always on UTC and we just knew 2000 UTC, that's when we record, that might be the middle of the night for someone. It might be first thing in the morning for someone else. But if you all know 2000 UTC, then no problem.
I mean, if the question was, should daylight savings time die in a fire, then it would be an easier question to answer.
Well, except not, because which way do you go? Do you stay on GMT or BST in the UK?
Yeah, I think most people in Europe are proposing to stay on the summer time, which isn't great for us because then we wouldn't be on UTC, which would be uncool.
Yeah, we'd be UTC +1, and that would just be terribly confusing.
And also, we brought the world this time zone. How could we not be on it?
Yeah, exactly.
We invented time for them, and now we're just abandoning them.
Well, except we're never going to do it, probably.
The Europeans have agreed to do it. They're going to do it. Then it'll be even worse because we're shifting and they're not.
Yeah, another Brexit benefit. Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.